you were starved of the very thing that you need in order to survive, love and connection. So of course it makes sense to cling on to it as if it is the only opportunity you have for it. When an anxious attachment wound is up, stillness feels dangerous. Not knowing feels like a threat. And the nervous system believes if I can control this, I can stay safe. Welcome to Grow with Robin Breckenridge, a podcast about stepping into the most fully expressed, aligned, and conscious version of yourself. Here, we dive into the real work of personal growth, establishing boundaries, understanding your patterns, building self-trust, healing emotional wounds, and creating relationships that feel safe, authentic, and fulfilling. I'm Robin, a life and relationship coach, and in each episode, we'll explore the tools, insights, and conversations that will help you not just improve your life and relationships, but truly transform them. You don't have to just go through it. Let's grow through it, and let's do it together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. As promised, we are continuing our conversation about attachment styles. And today's episode, we're going to talk about anxious attachment styles. And this particular topic is near and dear to me. I've mentioned it many times on the podcast, but I believe that my unhealed anxious attachment wound is what brought me down in this life. And I really got to a place where I could not continue with the level of pain that was in my nervous system and was playing out relationally in my life. So I always tell people, if you identify with having an anxious attachment style, the good news is that anxious attachment styles are loud. They're painful. And for people that have them, there usually is a place where the pain gets significant enough that we will change. We will do the new thing. We will try some new form of therapy or coaching or work. We will become uncomfortable because we cannot continue in the pain that we're in. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Now, I never want to lead anyone down a misinformed road, okay? When we're talking about healing, what I'm really talking about is learning to manage things in a way that is not harmful to you and other people. Will you have anxious attachment responses again in your life? You will. Because an anxious attachment response at the end of the day is a communication from your nervous system that you are not safe. So we don't want our nervous system to stop doing its job, which its job is it's a threat detector. It is there to tell us when there is a threat to our safety, our life, our well-being. So you will experience it again. Just like my whole program is based on not getting away from the challenging feelings that complicate our life, but learning to manage them because they will come up again. Because emotions are a communication from your nervous system that there's a need. It is this really neat, like symbiotic relationship that we have with our physical body. That is like the language only you speak. So will you have an anxious attachment flare up or experience it again? Absolutely, you will. But today I want you to understand it better because I remember the day that I had attachment styles explained to me in a way that landed, my life was never the same. It really felt like someone had a camera on me. I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. It's this thing. It's this response. So what I pledge to you guys is I'd like to teach you everything I know about attachment, short of individualizing it to your life, because that's what I can do in individual sessions. So if that's something that you're interested in, per usual, I'm going to recommend that you seek out someone who has a base in attachment theory or attachment styles. There are plenty of therapists and coaches that do that. If anybody's ever interested, I have two very, very beautiful referrals that I trust wholeheartedly. So if you're ever interested in working with someone and you don't want to wait for me, please just reach out, DM me, email me, and I'm happy to connect you to a couple of people who I think do amazing attachment informed work. So let's get started. Having an anxious attachment isn't just about feeling like you're too much in relationships. It's really about being the one who fights for connection, which means you don't pull back, you lean in, you reach, you try harder, you chase. And what can be confusing is that anxious attachment isn't just about the way you attach in relationships. It's also about how you manage pain. See, there are other attachment styles, such as an avoidant attachment, which we will cover next week, that moves away from the thing that's hurting it. An anxious attachment moves towards the thing that is hurting it. So the anxious attachment wound is the fight response of attachment. And it doesn't mean you fight like you associate it with anger. You fight to be loved. You fight to be chosen. You fight to be valued. You fight to be understood. The list goes on and on. The common theme is that you are fighting for what you need. So whenever I explain attachment in one-on-one sessions, I always love to give each attachment style a nickname. And the anxious attachment style nickname is the clinger. Now, that's not an insult. It's not a joke. It's a truth. In an anxious attachment wound, you will cling because connection equals safety. Now, I'll speak for myself. My unhinged anxious attachment really made me feel like I was just crazy. Like that's the time that I would send 100 text messages back to back, or God forbid, what I called the dissertation text, which meant sometimes you were getting an APA style paper on the ways you needed to show up better. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because, I mean, if we don't have a sense of humor, what do we have, right? Like when I look back on it, I look back on it with pure horror, so much compassion and sympathy for where I was at the time. And also all I can do is laugh because some of the things feel so far away from who I am today. So was I crazy? No, I was not crazy. Was my behavior crazy? Yes, my behavior was crazy. Here's the good news. You are not your behavior. So I was not crazy. My behavior was crazy and my behavior needed to change. My behavior was also a response to some crazy shit that was going on around me, to be fair. So we don't cling because we're crazy. It's a fear of loss paired with a deep capacity for love. Because guess what? Those of us who have anxious attachment wounds, we are deep feelers. We are the empaths. Now, I've probably mentioned this on this show before, but I do believe that being a deep feeler is both a blessing and a curse, or has its positive and its negative aspects to it. For myself, sometimes being a deep feeler can be a little lonely and isolating and, an unpredictable roller coaster. And also it allows me to do this. It allows me to digest, understand, and approach emotions in a way that not everyone else has the ability to do. And as much as the hard part of it is challenging, I wouldn't trade any of it to be able to hold healing space for other people. Now, I always love to give a nickname, so we know the anxious attachment wound is the clinger energy, but I also like to talk about the origin of the attachment wound. Now, again, there are lots of different ways that this is taught and different languaging. I like to keep it really simple. And because I've been doing this for 10 years and working with other people's nervous systems, I'm going to teach you what makes absolute and perfect sense to me. So the origin of an anxious attachment wound is that you experienced rejection, abandonment, or neglect from a primary caregiver growing up. So the nervous system absorbs the message. Love isn't reliable and it is a limited resource. So I have to work hard for it and cling on to it to keep it. So the body adapts. It learns to stay alert, stay vigilant, stay close, stay engaged, and whatever you do, don't let go. Now, I want you to hear this really clearly. This is not your personality. This is a survival strategy. Anyone except for a secure attachment, an anxious attachment, an avoidant attachment, an ambivalent attachment are all trauma responses. You are not your trauma responses. Again, this becomes the difference between who you are and your behavior. Now, I also want to talk about when you are in an anxious attachment response, how you emotionally regulate when you are in that particular attachment style. Now, I want to talk about when an anxious attachment wound is up, how we will emotionally regulate. And this is the part that often gets missed. When we are in an anxious attachment wound, we will regulate our emotions through control. When feelings rise, challenging ones like anxiety, fear, uncertainty, longing, overwhelm, rejection, abandonment, neglect, the nervous system says, I need to do something in order to feel okay and regulate. So you will manage your feelings by trying to manage the outcome. So remember, we are hardwired for connection. So an anxious attachment wound, avoidant, ambivalent means we are in a state of disconnection, both from ourselves and other people. But when we're in an anxious attachment wound, we don't just want connection. That is one thing we want and need. But we also want certainty. We want relief. So we will push, try harder, investigate, reread the text, look for tone, meaning, subtext, try to fix it, clarify it, resolve it, try to get ahead of the rejection, abandon before we get abandoned, and manipulate. Now that's a tough one. I will be honest. The first time I heard the definition of manipulation, which obviously gets a bad rap, right? When I was first thinking about it, I thought, oh, manipulation is like what bad people do on purpose. So then I found out the definition of manipulation, same definition as hypervigilance. It means that you are altering your behavior to control an outcome. When I first heard that definition, I went, oh my God, there's so many people in my life who've done that to me, like the nerve. And then I took a deep breath and I thought about it. And I said, do I do that? And then I literally could have barfed on the floor. I was doing it all over the place in my relationships. I was constantly altering what I was doing to control an outcome, to have people like me, to not be rejected, to not be judged, etc., not be left. So that is a form of manipulation. It's just that we don't have a lot of malice behind it. It's truly like a way that we are coping and staying above water. Now, personally, I don't want to manipulate anyone. I don't want to alter what I'm doing to control an outcome. Does it still happen? Of course, I'm human. I mean, given the opportunity, wouldn't we all love to control this whole thing? Of course, but the truth is we're not in control of much, and we are certainly not in control of outcomes, which is why eventually surrender becomes a really important tool for anyone who's struggling in an anxious attachment wound, because sometimes we don't have control. Sometimes we can't control an outcome. And the only thing we can do is give it over to that which has all of the power. That would be your higher power, God, source, creator, universe, whatever you want to call it. We'll get to that. We'll talk about surrender down the road. I'll do a whole episode on surrender, but surrender is a very important tool when we truly are powerless. And I believe that in the co-creative dance we are in with the universe, the outcome isn't always in our control. We can influence it by showing up, but we can't control it. So remember that altering what you're doing to control an outcome, this is self-regulation through control. And of course that makes sense. Doing something feels safer than waiting. Again, we have associated love, attention, validation, approval as a limited resource. And because the origin of an anxious attachment wound means you experienced rejection, abandonment, and neglect, what it means is you had an avoidant caregiver. You had an unavailable caregiver, or that caregiver left voluntarily or involuntarily through death. So what that means is essentially you were starved of the very thing that you need in order to survive, love and connection. So of course it makes sense to cling on to it as if it is the only opportunity you have for it. When an anxious attachment wound is up, stillness feels dangerous. Not knowing feels like a threat. And the nervous system believes if I can control this, I can stay safe. So let's talk about some common behaviors. Anxious attachment can look like feeling unable to relax when there's conflict. Now, I'm not just talking about, I don't know if anybody's comfortable in conflict, especially with people who are close to us. But I'm talking about you cannot relax or go to bed or calm down or connect to whatever it is you're doing, be it work, life, etc., without the clarity you need from the relationship or the conflict. Over texting, over explaining, over giving, proving. Taking responsibility for the emotional temperature of the relationship. Putting other people on pedestals, them, their needs, their wants, their opinions. Making others the authority on your worth. Choosing emotionally unavailable or avoidant partners. Now, this one is so confusing, but what's true is we will unconsciously go towards the same energy that wounded us. So if you were wounded with neglect because someone was emotionally unavailable, our little spidey sense is going to go off when we are around someone's energy who is unavailable. And some very younger part of us is going to go towards that same energy in an attempt to have a corrective experience, meaning this time we'll get loved, this time we'll be picked, this time we'll be prioritized, we'll be seen, we'll be valued. But of course, logically, if we are going towards the same energy that wounded us, and if that energy happens to be unavailable, then they are not available for a corrective experience. They don't have the capacity for it. So it means we don't end up in a corrective experience. We end up re-traumatized. So in an anxious attachment wound, we will often seek out avoidant and unavailable partners. And of course, we will do anything we can to stay connected to people in our life because disconnection is dangerous. But of course, anytime we abandon ourselves and prioritize our connection over our well-being, over protecting ourselves, there's a cost. Here are some of the costs. The more you try to control the outcome, the further you move away from yourself. Control often leads to self-abandonment, exhaustion, resentment, loss of self-trust. The list goes on and on. But feeling like you can control everything is an unrealistic expectation of self. Trust me, I have been very transparent with my clients, and I've been transparent on this podcast. If there was a way for me to teach you guys how to control everything in your life, how to do things, I don't know, in maladaptive ways that worked, I think I would teach them. At least I would have a long time ago. But they're not possible. They take us out of alignment. We were not made to live out of alignment. Alignment is truth. We were meant to live connected and in alignment with our truth. That is how we are the most fully expressed versions of us. So staying in an anxious attachment wound, listen, lots of people do it. I did it for a long time in my life. You can, you're just going to suffer a lot. And there are other ways. So before I get to how do we shift out of an anxious attachment wound, I want to talk about how an anxious attachment actually works in the body. So the way that I teach it in my individual sessions is that we're looking to get what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and what you're doing into alignment and congruence, which means that we have to know that what we're feeling and the messages those feelings are communicating, that our actions are in alignment with that. Okay. So if you're feeling, let's say it is unsafe, rejected, that is calling for a need for protection. When we don't have any boundaries and we don't protect ourselves, we're not in alignment. If we can figure out how to have a boundary with the thing that's hurting us, not chase it, cling to it, hold on to it, which reminds me of a saying, everything I left has claw marks on it, which is very applicable to any of us that have anxious attachment wounds, then the goal is that we want to get what we're thinking, feeling, and doing into alignment. So when we're in an anxious attachment wound, what happens is you feel first and you feel deeply. Because again, we're the deep feelers and the empaths. We've been through some stuff, guys. You feel deeply and fast. And then you move into action to manage that challenging feeling. So it looks like we're feeling, we're doing. Maybe that doing looks like reaching out to the person, fixing, chasing, explaining, reassuring. But the last thing that we're doing is thinking, which means the logic is the last part of our process. By the time thinking shows up, the nervous system has already acted. This is why so many anxious people, me included, and this has probably happened millions of times in my coaching practice, where people come to me and go, I do not know why I did that. Why the fuck did I do that? I knew better. I knew this guy or this girl or this person was no good for me. Now, is it entirely just that you're impulsive? No. Is that an impulsive way of managing your feelings? Yes. But what's most important is it means you are activated. This is the fight response in attachment. Again, not fight like aggression all the time. It's fight to keep the relationship alive, fight to be chosen, to be understood, not to be left. Your nervous system learns this fantasy that if I fight hard enough, I won't be abandoned. Now, one big thing that's missing in this equation is often we don't even ask ourselves, is this something I want to be a part of? Do I even like this person? Is this someone who's in alignment with what I'm looking for in my life? I see it all the time, specifically in dating and in job searches, which are both vetting processes, where people will come and they'll be like, I really hope I get this job. I'm going on my second date. I really hope this guy picks me. And I'll go, but do you want that job? Do you want that person? And they go, oh, wait, Or maybe they get ghosted by someone and their nervous system gets flooded with all the unhealed rejection and abandonment and neglect that's in their nervous system. And they come to me and they go, I didn't even barely know this person. I just, swiped him on Hinge or whatever. And when that activation happens, we stop even considering what we want. We stop considering what we want to choose, and we solely focus on being chosen. Now, here's the reframe that changes everything in an anxious attachment wound. Now, if you're noticing, I'm not calling you or labeling you as having an anxious attachment. I mentioned in the previous episode that we are not one of these things. You do not have an anxious attachment wound. You do shift into the energy of an anxious attachment wound. And like I said in our last episode, you will do one of the 4 attachment styles given whatever energy you are opposing relationally. But you will default to one over others. So how do we shift out of an anxious attachment wound? An anxious attachment wound does not need to feel less. You are empathic. You are intuitive. You are deeply attuned. The work is not about numbing. The work is not about getting away from your feelings. That's a big lesson I learned in my life. If I kept escaping my feelings and trying to run around them and outrun them, it was prolonging the healing. I realized at one point in my journey when my anxious attachment wound blew up in my face that the only thing I could do was learn how to take care of myself while challenging feelings were up. And that work is pausing. Pausing is the best mental health intervention of all time and not afforded to us when we are blacked out in a trauma response, like an anxious attachment wound. That is why learning these things is so important, because we can start to identify and slow down and pause. But it is equally as important that this work is dropped into your body somatically. It's why I'm a big, big fan. Like, listen, I do a lot of teaching in this work, right? A big part of my coaching is teaching. If I just stopped there, this information isn't just to be housed intellectually in your brain. It is also to be integrated into your body and into your nervous system. So the work is we need to pause. So that looks like you will still feel first when an anxious attachment wound is up. So that challenging feeling comes up, the intensity of it is up, and then we pause. And that pause allows us to access our logic. And that logic might be looking at the facts, looking at the reality of the situation. It might be accessing a tool. That's why this work or work with a professional is so profound, because you're going to have some pretty good information in there if you need to use it. So you access a tool, you access logic, good logic, discernment, good judgment, and then that influences a healthier decision. And that healthier decision is a decision that's in alignment with your well-being. So remember, you will still feel first. That's your strength. These anxious attachment wounds are not all bad. You are a deep feeler with a big capacity for connection. That is a beautiful thing. But we do have to parent the behavior when challenging feelings come up. So you still feel first, that's your strength. But instead of immediately acting to manage the feelings, you pause, you breathe, you access logic, you give yourself time and space to process, you use discernment, which is good judgment. You get curious with yourself. Is this aligned? Is this safe? Do I even like this person? Is this self-honoring? The pause is where control turns into choice or agency. The pause is where anxious attachment begins to soften and transmute into secure attachment. Now, boundaries, remember, Boundaries are bridges. They allow you to both protect yourself and stay connected in a relationship. Boundaries are not walls for anxious attachment. Boundaries allow you to stay in your integrity without losing yourself in a relationship and disappearing, to stop choosing connection at the cost of yourself. Without boundaries, anxious attachment becomes self-erasure. With boundaries, it becomes secure relating. Now, I mentioned in last week's episode that my approach to attachment really shifted midway in my own personal growth work. When I first learned it, in a way, again, that landed because I had learned about attachment before, I was like, okay, this is like a system that I might be able to hack a little bit and figure out. Then I remember specifically one day driving in my car, and this feeling came over me, and it truly felt like I was going to crawl out of my skin. Like it was just such an urgent feeling. And I pulled my car over because it was so intense that I had to get curious with it. And I pulled my car over and I went, what is this? And I went, this is my anxious attachment wound. It was urgent. It was terrified. It was telling me how I had to fix everything about the situation and my life and anything that felt or had discomfort around it. And I went, oh my gosh, I think this is my anxious attachment wound. And then I went, oh, I just always felt like that. And the amount of compassion I have for myself and other people who identify with that I often felt like I was crawling out of my skin in relationships or challenges is honestly no way to live. And I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. So I learned somatically what it felt like in my body. That was one alarm. And then I realized, okay, this alarm would start going off in certain circumstances. One specific circumstance when I was in a room full of people that I liked, and I started feeling anxious, and that feeling started coming up in my body. And I got curious again, which is, you guys, the thing just doesn't get old. Like it's just one of the most wonderful skill sets you could have as a relational conscious human being. And I realized, oh, this girl that I really like, I don't feel comfortable around her because she feels a little judgy. She looks me up and down. I say things. I can sense it in her energy and the way she's reacting and responding to me. And then it made sense to me. This anxious attachment wound is not a curse. It's not this thing that makes me so extra in relationships. It is an alarm system that is always letting me know that abandonment, rejection, and or neglect is in my environment, or it's in the story I'm telling myself. Now, I've been testing that theory out with clients, with myself. I've never had it be wrong. And then I realized, okay, I'm building this trust with myself. Because of the boundary pyramid, I'm learning how to trust the right people. And then I have this system in me that is really wise, really connected, and I believe possibly connected to the thing that created everything here, the most intelligent force, period. I realized, oh, that thing, it doesn't lie to me either. And I can also trust that with everything I have. So now when that anxious attachment response comes up in me, when the avoidant response comes up in me, the ambivalent, I'm not crazy. It's not coming from nowhere. I'm not making anything up. It is the wisest thing I have in my body, letting me know that the things that originally hurt me and caused original wounds in me, they're around me. Or this is a really important thing. It's in the story I'm telling myself. Sometimes maybe there was nothing going on in the room with the people that I'm in, but I'm telling myself the story. That person doesn't like me. They're acting really cold. I must have done something wrong. They must be mad at me. And your nervous system, it doesn't know the difference between something that's actually happening or a story you are telling yourself. It is going to react the same way. So the two things I want you to really pay attention to. Now, I'm hopping you guys ahead. I figured this out, along my journey. If this feels super overwhelming, if you're like, what in the heck is she even talking about? I highly recommend seeking out a professional and working out some of your own attachment wounding. If that is not affordable to you or available to you, there is so much information. There has never been a better time to be curious about your attachment style and your own wounding. And now there are podcasts, there's people on TikTok, on Instagram, there are books. I highly recommend seeking out some more information to understand what events have happened in your life that created wounding in your nervous system that is flaring up around the threat. So how do we shift from an anxious attachment to a secure attachment? Well, an anxious attachment doesn't just need reassurance. It needs something safe to trust. Remember, trust is data over time. This is where the boundary pyramid comes in. Trust isn't just a feeling. Trust is an integration of data and what you know and how you feel. There's where that good old word discernment comes back in, right? So the boundary pyramid allows us to know. And if you guys forgot, or if you're just joining, go all the way back to the boundary pyramid episodes. I think I broke everyone down. But we need to know who we can trust and who we don't. And remember, there is an absolute around trust. You either trust someone or you don't. If you kind of trust someone, that's not full trust. And this isn't because we're being rigid or like excluding people in our life. It's because we need clarity. Because at the end of the day, a lot of us, if not all of us, have an inner child that has incurred some type of wound. And for a lot of us, that wound comes from not being able to trust people in our environment, not being able to trust the consistency of a connection. And so that means that we have a responsibility to protect and parent that inner child. And that means a big part of that is knowing who is safe or trustworthy and who isn't. So having safe, trustworthy people in your life, including people that you have data over time, that you can trust them. Because remember, and I really want to speak to the people who identify as having an anxious attachment at times or having that be your default attachment. No one is 100% of anything. So we can't have expectation that someone is 100% consistent, that their communication is 100% consistent, that they are always, always trustworthy. Remember, in the boundary pyramid, in that trust category, we have the ability to repair. So that means that if there is a breach of trust, if there is something that happens that doesn't feel safe, that person can prioritize your well-being enough to repair it in a way that feels like they were accountable. It feels like they cared about how it impacted you and that they can change their behavior going forward, or at a very minimum, work on it. So we need something safe to trust. We need healthy, consistent communication. Now, there was a time in my life where I thought I was just so cool and like chill and just really easy and agreeable. Now, I am kind of chill and easy and agreeable, but I also definitely have needs. I think what I was calling chill and cool and agreeable was stuffing things down that bothered me or activated me or didn't feel safe because I didn't want to lose the connection with that person. And there was a time in my life where there was inconsistent communication going on in a relationship. I had a lot of pride that I was like so chill and so cool. And whatever happened, this person didn't respond or took days or whatever. And, I started really second guessing myself and playing through everything that I had done. And, did I smell weird? Was there something? I mean, it just went back to me personalizing that distance in the communication. And I went, oh, well, I'm cool. Like, it doesn't bother me. Whatever. I'm chill. And then I had this epiphany. I was like, oh my God, I'm not chill. And I'm not cool. And I'm not relaxed. I'm actually super activated by this. And owning that and being in the truth of it allowed me to ask for what I wanted as far as communication, and to be able to exit situations that didn't provide that. So what I want you guys to hear is that currently in my relationship, I'm not rigid around communication. There's just an ease. I just know that he's going to write me back. So I don't want you to hear that, like, for the rest of my life, I became rigid around communication. But I do know that if someone's going to ghost me, if someone's going to disappear on me, if there's like gas breaks way of connection where like you get all the connection and then there's no connection, that is just not going to sit well for my nervous system. And when I started accepting that, I started tolerating it less in my relationships. We need predictability. We need follow through. So important. Like, words and actions aligning is very important to people who have an anxious attachment response. And we need a relationship with ourselves that is trustworthy, because in an anxious attachment, we often have a low perception of ourselves and a high perception of others, which means that we will hand our power over to other people, and we will often enter into relationships in a one down position. And that would be because we don't trust ourselves. I think a very relatable thing about anxious attachment is that it's really hard to know the difference between your intuition and your fear. I know that when I would hear people say, listen to your gut, trust your gut, I was like, hold up. Like, I don't know if my gut is telling me to do these bad things, or if it's my brain, or if it's my fear. What I know now is there is a very distinct energetic difference between my intuition and my fear. And what I know to be different energetically is that my intuition doesn't have a lot of energetic movement around it. Like, if you guys aren't watching me, whenever I talk about an anxious attachment, when I just start moving my hands, like fluttering, because I feel like that's what an anxious attachment wound feels like. Like, it has a bit of a motor. There's an energetic charge to it. My intuition doesn't have that. I might be like, wait, how am I going to do that? Or how is that going to work? But it feels very grounded and calm, because that's what truth feels like in our body. So it is so important. And in fact, it is the core of everything that I'm teaching you in this podcast. It's the core of the work that I do with my individual clients. Self-trust. Without it, we don't have much in relationships. Just recently, I had a little meeting with my amazing team, my podcast producer, and who's my social media marketing person. And now I have this really, really beautiful person that I can't wait to introduce you guys to, who's coming on as an assistant for me, and just an amazing human being. And we were looking at the podcast episodes, and I just figured that the boundary episodes would probably be the most popular episodes, or have the most listeners, because it tends to be just the most applicable, and it's really what people ask of me the most. And what got the most listeners on this podcast were episodes around self-trust, were episodes around self-abandonment and self-neglect, which tells me that you guys are done. You are at your capacity for not living in accordance with your value, and that you are tired and done with self-abandonment. And it is time to start building self-trust. So the core of every single attachment wound, because we're going to cover the next 3, and then I'm going to teach you guys about a secure attachment, is trusting yourself. So that means you can trust your intuition, your gut, your knowing. It also means that you can trust yourself to manage a feeling, that we will live through quote unquote abandonment, rejection, neglect, that if someone leaves you, you don't have to leave yourself. Because I'm going to remind you guys, listen, rejection sucks. I'm not even going to package it any other way. I still don't like it. I think it stings every time. We'll get more into rejection in future episodes, but it sucks. Feeling abandoned sucks. Neglect sucks. But it becomes intolerable when you abandon yourself in the abandonment, when you reject yourself in the rejection, when you neglect yourself in the neglect. That's when it becomes intolerable. And those are not esteemable actions, and those are not ways that we build self-trust. So let me be clear. You do not manage or heal an anxious attachment wound by finding the perfect person or partner. You heal it by choosing yourself in moments of activation, emotionally attuning to those parts, learning how to parent the parts of self that are activated within that attachment. Because trust me, when my anxious attachment is up, it is a younger part of me that experienced that core wound that is behind the wheel. By practicing a pause, by using boundaries even when it's scary, by building a sense of self outside of your relationships, by making repeated self-honoring decisions. Remember that self-esteem and building the muscle of a secure attachment is built through esteemable actions. When you're a doormat, when you're in the one down, when you're chasing somebody, when you're pursuing, when you're proving, none of those are esteemable actions. Having a boundary, an esteemable action. Having a limit, asking for what you need, saying no to something that is not in alignment with your value. Those are esteemable actions. Not chasing somebody, taking care of yourself when you're activated. I want you to remember something else. Anxious energy is big energy. And what we know is that energy doesn't just go away. It's transmuted. So if you are listening to this and you are carrying a lot of anxious energy and you go, okay, you want me to stop texting the guy or chasing the girl or whatever. Well, what am I supposed to do with this energy? Direct it at anything other than the destructive act or the survival pattern that you've been doing for a long time. That could look like organizing your junk drawer that you haven't gotten to in a few years. One of my personal favorites, your linen closet. I don't like to mess with that. That is just not my jam. But let me tell you, when there's a lot of anxious energy in me and I can go, hey, I could look up how to organize this. I could focus my intention and anxious energy on doing something purpose driven. At the end of it, I didn't hurt myself. And now I have an organized linen closet. Maybe you could pick up painting. Personally, I just ordered a paint by number for like adults. That looks like a real painting when you're done. So that seemed like a really good entry into me getting creative with paints. It's taken a long time to ship, but I'm anxiously awaiting that. And that is somewhere that you can direct your energy. At a time in my life where I was using my anxious attachment for things that were not purpose driven, I remember a mentor of mine at the time, she said, hey, all this energy you're directing at this particular thing that is not being reciprocated, if you pointed that at something else, it would be big. Like you would do something big in this life. Well, here I am. I've now helped thousands of people. I have a podcast that I'm talking to you about all of these things that I've learned along my journey. I've had the amazing opportunity to work and get to know some of the best people I've ever known through this business. I did do something big with the same energy that I was using for self-destructive behaviors in my life. I am no different than anybody listening to this podcast. So I want you to hear that, like, whatever you're directing your energy at that feels like you're running on a treadmill and you're running in place, if we can point it at anything else, there's a high likelihood you could do something pretty big with that energy. So if you identify with having an anxious attachment, you are not broken. You are a deep feeler. You have a big capacity for love and connection. You can be relational. You can find relationships that can reciprocate what you're giving and what you're looking for. This work, it's not about learning how to care less. I definitely identified at times with thinking, or maybe even being jealous that there were people that didn't feel as deeply as I could, and it felt like they got off easy. Listen, we're going to talk about avoidant attachment wounds next week. Ain't nobody get off easy when it comes to attachment wounding. All create suffering in different ways, but it's not about caring less. Your capacity is beautiful. The work is about learning how to care without losing yourself. Chasing a self-abandonment, proving a self-abandonment, forcing a self-abandonment. I hope at a minimum that this episode has sparked something in you to get curious with yourself, your own reactions in relationship, your own patterns, and maybe finding out a little bit more about this attachment system and what it might be communicating to you and how you can utilize it to help you in this life versus hinder you. You're looking at someone who had a massively unhealed, unhinged, anxious attachment. And now I've helped so many people suffer less in their own body. So stay tuned. Next week, we're going to talk about avoidant attachment styles, and then we're going to talk about ambivalent attachment styles a little bit more in depth, secure attachment styles, and then I got a whole lot of fun things planned, including a guest who is an expert on attachment styles. And we're already plotting a really, really great episode with some great content. So I hope that you'll join next week. Again, thank you for being you. Thank you for being open to this work and for showing up, because I see that people are tuning in each week, and I'm so grateful. So I'll see you next week. Have a great week. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for being here and for doing this work. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Come connect with me over on TikTok at Robin Breckenridge or Instagram at Coach with Robin, where I share even more insights, tools, and conversations around boundaries, self-trust, relational healing, and so much more. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and personal growth purposes only. The insights and tools I share are based on my experience as a life and relationship coach and are meant for general guidance. Each person's story is unique, and the nuances of individual experiences can't always be addressed in this format. What's shared here may not be applicable to every situation, especially those involving abuse, oppression, severe mental illness, or systematic harm. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please seek support from a qualified mental health professional or emergency resources. Thank you for listening and for showing up for yourself in this way. Take care, and I'll see you next time.